Let me introduce our guest for tonight. My guest tonight is Bruce Gernon. Bruce Gernon is the only person in the world to witness what creates the Bermuda Triangle. Others have seen parts of this phenomena, and some have seen it but vanished. Gernon is the only one to see this from its birth stage through its mature stage and enter the heart of the time storm and escape through a tunnel vortex and experience a time warp of 30 minutes forward in time and 100 miles forward in space. After 31 years of research, Gernon discovered how he had flown those 100 miles in such a short time and never seen the earth or sky around him. He was captured by what he calls electronic fog. Everybody, please welcome, once again, my guest, Bruce Gernon. Good evening, sir. So good to have you here.
Hey, Michael. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, by all means, thank you. So, Bruce, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with the Bermuda Triangle, and tell everybody a little bit about yourself as well. And if you have a website, which I know you do, you could throw that out there too.
Okay, sure, yeah. My website is BermudaTriangleFog.com.
Okay.
And on that website, there's also my new partner's website, Professor David Paris. You can find him on the contact page, and he has a website also that's dedicated to my theories and the Bermuda Triangle.
Okay. All right. So now, after looking into your story just a little bit, I'd have to say that's got to be quite scary, Bruce, to be flying through fog and radar control says they can't find you on their radar. So I don't know where exactly you'd like to start, but I guess we could start with that if you like.
Yeah, it's scary. I've been in it twice. The second time I was in it back in 1996 in the Florida Keys. I was more scared than the first time, and yet that second time was only a mild form of this electronic fog. But the reason I was more afraid was because I was getting older. And when I experienced this back in 1970, I was only 23 years old. And I was kind of like the kids nowadays that have no fear. I had that attitude, and it actually it didn't scare me back then. And I concentrated mostly on flying the airplane anyway, which is always the number one thing you have to do when you're a pilot. So all my concentration was there, and I didn't really have time to get scared. But it happened way back in December 4th, 1970. And I was leaving Andros Island in the Bahamas with my dad. He was the co-pilot, and our partner was a business associate, so there was three of us on board. And we departed the island and took off at exactly 3 p.m. We lifted off. I had a good friend there named John Woolbright that was a mathematical scientist that worked for AUTEC. And I'd like to talk to you about AUTEC sometime while we're interviewing, if we could. Because
absolutely.
I noticed conspiracies are one of your expertise. And
yes, sir.
So if we could talk about that sometime when we get a chance, I'd like to talk to you about that.
I would like that myself, sir.
So yeah, so it was from Autech was where I was visiting there in Andros Island, where my friend worked, and I wanted to leave in the morning, but there was a large thunderstorm over the island, and back in 1970, radar or weather was not nearly the way it is today, where you can get it on the GPS and see exactly what the situation is. And in 1970 in Andros Island, they didn't even have a telephone on the entire island, so I couldn't get any weather. So we had to just look and see what it looked like, and it looked too intense to be taken off in the morning. And then it finally cleared up in the afternoon. But my partner, Professor Paris, has reviewed the weather. He's a meteorologist for many years, and he's actually come up with the weather, what it looked like on that day. And there was a large system of low pressure over Andros Island and Nassau, and heavy rains all that morning, and then it cleared up in the afternoon. So that's when we took off, and it was just a light mist when we took off, and the ceiling was about 1,500 feet, so we stayed at 1,000 feet over the island and started heading direct for Bimini.
Mm-hmm.
And it remained overcast until we got to the western edge of Andros Island. And at that point, it cleared up. So the pressure system was mainly over the island of Andros, and that's the largest island in the Bahamas, 40 miles wide by 110 miles long. And that probably helped to create this weather system. And then when we got clear of the island, the weather was clear. And when I looked offshore over the Great Bahama Bank, I noticed this strange cloud, which was the beginning, the birth stage of this storm system that I experienced. And I call this system a time storm.
Interesting.
And it was an elliptical shaped cloud, and it looked like what's known as a lenticular cloud. But lenticular clouds only form at about 20,000 feet, and this cloud was only about 500 feet above the ocean, and it was about 1,000 feet thick and maybe a mile long and a half-mile wide, and it was shaped like a lens, and it had smooth, silky edges.
Wow.
And I just started to climb up and accelerate at the same time that I noticed this cloud, and it was right in my flight path, directly in front of me. And it looked harmless. So I went ahead and climbed up over it, and it was 2 or 3 miles offshore of Andros. And then when I got on top of it, I was about 3,000 feet high. I was able to contact Miami Radio for the first time and file my flight plan. And I asked them about the weather, and they said that the weather was clear between Andros and Florida, but there was some widely scattered large thunderstorms around South Florida that I should probably be able to circumnavigate when I got there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I filed the flight plan with them and continued climbing up. And then after I got through filing that flight plan, I got back to concentrating on what the weather looked like outside, and I was really surprised at what I saw here. This lenticular cloud had completely changed its formation, and it had spread out on either side of me, or all around me, as far as I could see, and the visibility was at least 10 miles. And
now, anything is possible in weather, but now that's not normal at all, right?
No, it's not. At the time, I thought maybe, well, it was just a cumulonimbus thunderstorm, and I just happened to get on top of it in the birth stage. Well, that's what I was thinking anyway, but that wasn't the case, though, because I was climbing at 1,000 feet per minute and going forward at 110 miles an hour, and this cloud was spreading out way faster than 110 miles an hour. And at the time,
that's not normal.
No, but I really didn't have time to really think about what's normal at this point, because it caught up to the aircraft when I got to about 4,500 feet, and I went inside it. And visibility went down to near zero, and well, it looked like a typical cloud while I was inside it. And
yeah, I was just going to ask you what it looked like.
Yeah, visibility was really low, like being in a normal stratus cloud or something like that. But
okay.
I broke free of it, got above it, and then I could only get maybe 100 or 200 feet up above it, and then it would catch up to me again, and then I'd go back inside it. So this kept going on for about 5 more times. It was kind of like I'd get in it, and then it would boost me out of it. And when we got up to like 10,000 feet or more, my dad suggested that we turn around and go back to Andros. And so I started thinking about that, and I told him, okay, we'll do that in a minute. And then at 11,500 feet, we finally broke free of this cloud. And then when I looked around, it was hard to believe what I was seeing. This small lenticular cloud had spread out on either side of me as far as I could see, and that would be 10 miles to either side, and so I could see at least 20 miles of this storm, and it had turned into like what appeared to be a huge squall, and now the top of the storm was probably 20 or 30,000 feet up. It looked like it was shaped in the form of a semicircle. As far as I could see, that was the other very strange thing that I noticed, that it was almost perfect in its symmetrical shape. And instead of being like a normal squall with scalloped edges, and, it had smooth edges and sort of a perfect shape to it. And I leveled off and started cruising at 195 miles an hour, and then tried to forget about what I had just seen, because now I was beyond it and still heading for Bimini, right over the middle of the Great Bahama Bank. And so then we're cruising along, and then like 5 minutes later, I look in front of me, and here's this gigantic squall, very similar to the squall I had just departed, only now the semicircle is in front of me and just the opposite in direction of the one that was behind me. And also it had built up now to maybe close to 60,000 feet in altitude. And it still had that perfect curve to it, which was unusual. And I thought, well, maybe I can fly under it. And then I noticed another strange thing. it had no ceiling, no base to it like a normal cloud would. It was laying right on the top of the ocean, so
Wow.
I couldn't go under it. And I was on using my instruments, 2 VOR navigational instruments and 1 automatic directional finder instrument, and those are the 3 main electronic navigational instruments to steer me direct to Bimini along with my compasses. And so I maintained that course, and I went ahead and penetrated into the storm to see what it was like. And when I got
kind of daredeviling, were you?
well, kind of, yeah. Like I was telling you earlier, I had no fear back then.
Yeah, I see that.
And I went ahead and entered into it, and it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was calm, stable, and visibility was maybe 3 miles, and there wasn't any precipitation. But as I started to penetrate it, this electricity started going off, and it was like it was some form of lightning, but there weren't any lightning bolts, but it was flashes of lightning. And the deeper I went, the more intense these lights became. And then it got to the point where it was almost like black and white. When the lightning would go off, I could see a few miles, but then when it went off, I couldn't see hardly at all. So then I decided, well, it was just too intense with electricity, so I had to deviate from the flight path for the first time, and I took a turn to the left, which would be due south, and I shot back out of the storm. And at that point, I called Miami radio because we were in contact with them and with a flight plan, and I let them know that I had deviated from my flight path and that there was some storm blocking my way, and I was going to see if I could fly around it. And so, you know, they said it's like, well, not a big deal. Let us know when you get around the storm. So I'm heading south now, and I'm flying along the edge of this storm. And I'm seeing how it's curved, and it's curving back toward where I had come from. So then I realized that as I kept going for about 5 minutes, I realized that, well, this thing's connected now. And I'm trapped inside this huge donut-shaped storm with the inside of the opening, clear opening, would be about 30 miles. And then the outside would be, 40 miles or more. And I wasn't real sure what to do at this point, so I just kept going. But then I noticed where the two ends of this storm met, and they would probably be like the opposite ends of where it was formed. And it formed just offshore of Andros, and then it ignited and spread out to like 40 miles away at an unbelievable pace. It would ignite probably close to 300 miles an hour. And
it's amazing.
It met on the bottom first, and it formed like a huge valley between the clouds. So I figured, well, that opening was aiming right toward Miami to the west. So I figured, well, I could just get through there and get the heck out of this storm system. And we were at 11,500 feet. I maintained that altitude, and then as we started to head for the opening, these two big anvil heads formed on the top of the storm, and then the two anvil heads connected to each other, and they formed together, and this formed like a horizontal tunnel between the storm. And the tunnel was like over 10 miles long.
Wow.
And I figured, well, it's still the only way to get out, and I consulted with my dad and to see if he agreed to go ahead and shoot through it, and he concurred, so we went ahead and aimed right forward, and it was a little bit lower than us to the center of the tunnel, so we started diving down. It was about 10,000 feet up, and then I noticed it was getting smaller, fairly rapid, and so I went to full power and up to 230 miles an hour as we dove down, and went ahead and shot through this horizontal tunnel. And when I entered the mouth of the tunnel, it was maybe close to 1,000 feet or a little bit less in diameter. And as soon as the aircraft penetrated into the tunnel, an amazing thing happened. Instantly, these strange lines formed, and they were like hovering maybe 50 feet or 100 feet from the walls of the tunnel, and they were made up of a series of clouds about the size of a school bus, and they were like broken apart but connected in a line, and they continued all the way to the other end of the tunnel in a swirling type motion that it looked like you're looking through a rifle barrel where the spiral goes through it, and it was slowly rotating counterclockwise. And so, I mean, this was, you know, one of the most incredible parts of this flight, was seeing this happen, and apparently I'm the only one that's ever seen this, along with my dad and our business partner, but they're both passed away, so now it's just me that's been the only one that's ever flown through one of these tunnels. Dr. Valentine named them Vortex Tunnel.
At least anybody else who has experienced something like that in the Bermuda Triangle has never actually made it to talk about it.
Right. There may have been some other planes that have gone through it, but they disappeared. And
now, where do you suppose they go? I mean, do they go down into the ocean? Are they being sucked into space, perhaps?
Well, I would say most of the planes that have vanished have gone into the ocean, and it's just so difficult to find them. But there is a possibility, though, that they could disintegrate if they get into this force field, and it's of the highest intensity that it's capable of being, and they enter that. I believe that it could probably disintegrate a vessel.
Okay, now while you were in this tunnel, I mean, what did it look like? Did it look, I mean, was it bright? Did it have colors in there? Kind of try to get an idea, maybe a little visual of this.
Well, the other end of the tunnel was bright blue, and it looked like very clear skies, and it was like 3:30 in the afternoon, and the sun was setting to the west, and that's where I was aiming. So the sun was shining right through this tunnel. So it had like silvery linings all along the edges of it, bright silver, and the clouds that were spiraling counterclockwise were like a dull gray color instead of the bright silver. And the tunnel appeared to be a little over 10 miles long, and it should have taken me just over 3 minutes to get to the other end of the tunnel. And actually, I miscalculated my trajectory, thinking I could make it through this tunnel, because I had no idea that it would take, I mean, I had an idea it would take 3 minutes, but I had no idea that the tunnel would collapse before the 3 minutes. So I was really taking a gamble, although I have seen many of these tunnels since then, but never one as big as this one. But the best one I've seen, it's on my website, I believe. It's about 5 miles long, and they usually last about 3 minutes. And so it should have taken me 3 minutes to get to the other end of this tunnel. So maybe I could have made it, but this is where this time dilation starts to take effect. Apparently right when I entered into the tunnel, time itself was dilating, and I was being transported through time forward. And
so a time warp, then?
Yes, right. That was the beginning of this time warp. And instead of taking 3 minutes to reach the other end of the tunnel, it only took about 20 seconds. And when I reached the other end of the tunnel, it had become so narrow that the wingtips scraped the edges of it. And so the wings were 36 feet apart. And so the tunnel must have been less than 36 feet. And I scraped the edges of it when I reached the end of it. And right at that point was when I felt the only sensation that comes along with this experience. It was a really strange sensation of zero gravity, but it wasn't just zero gravity. It was also a sensation of hydroplaning forward. So it was like the combination of those two. And I've never felt that before. You know, I do zero gravity all the time just for fun when I go flying every week. But never this sensation of hydroplaning also. And that lasted about 10 seconds. And while that was going on, I looked behind me and I watched the tunnel collapse and turn into a slit. And now this big slit was rotating clockwise from my observation. And the clear blue sky that I had just entered instantly vanished. And now I was in this strange gray fog, sort of a yellowish gray fog. And then the sensation of zero gravity went away. And I look at my instruments, and my magnetic compass was spinning all by itself. And I'm heading like directly for Miami, about 290 degrees. And I checked my instruments, the electronic navigational instruments, to give me a position fix. See, I was about 100 miles away from Miami when I entered this tunnel. I had verified that along with my dad. He was the navigator, the main navigator. And so when we came out of the tunnel, I figured, well, we're about 85 or 90 miles from Miami. And so I tried to verify that with my electronic instruments, I was unable to do that. And so I said to my dad, give me a position fix, which he was really good at doing. And so he starts fumbling with the instruments, and he couldn't give me a location. And that's when I realized that, not only the compass is spinning, but all the electronic instruments are also malfunctioning. And so then I figured, well, okay, I'll try to contact Miami radio, they called them back then. Now it's air traffic control. And got a hold of them. And I told them it was probably 85 miles east of Miami, but we're not sure of our location because the instruments aren't working right here. And, of course, they realized there's something wrong going on here. So they tried to locate us on radar. We're unable to. So then they switched us over to this radar center in Miami, and they tried to locate us. And they couldn't locate anything between Miami and Andros at the time. Back in 1970, there wasn't that much traffic. Nobody was out there on a Friday afternoon. So it's like we weren't sure where we were, and they couldn't help us with radar. And at that point, my dad started to panic. And he took the microphone, grabbed it from me, and started yelling and screaming at the radar controllers, cussing them out, telling them, what the hell do you mean you can't tell where we're at? And,
oh, boy.
Yeah, it was
well, they had to
confusing.
be concerned with it, too, to lose a plane like that.
Yeah. And then my passenger, our business partner, started asking a few questions. I told him, well, don't worry, we're fine. We're going to keep flying. And then a little bit later, he started asking some more questions, and he was mumbling. He was like incoherent.
Wow.
And, yeah, it was really strange. So I had to ignore anything he said to me and keep concentrating on flying the airplane.
Right.
Because, there was apparently, and it's happened to other people that have been in this too, that it can make you nauseous, and it can make you pass out.
And have they experienced similar activity as you did? I mean, did they find that they were in a time warp? Anybody else, or are you the only one who's actually spoken out on it?
No, there's others that have been in time warps, not just me.
Okay.
And so at this point, I'm flying along, and only 3 minutes had passed, close to almost 3 minutes, and the radar controller couldn't help us, so we just told him to, stand by. And then right about after 3 minutes, another incredible thing happened. These strange lines formed all around the airplane, parallel to the direction of flight. And then the lines turned into cracks, like slits. And I could see blue sky on the other side of the line.
Almost like a tear in time and space, like a tear in the sky.
Yeah, it was like a rip.
Uh-huh.
And I thought the lines were many miles long, but that was an optical illusion. They were really actually close to me. It took me just over 30 years to figure that out. But the lines turned into slits or rips, cracks, and then they kept getting wider. And this process took about 10 seconds before the slits were so wide that they connected to each other, and then they were all gone. And I was in clear blue sky. And I looked behind me, expecting to see this huge cloud bank of fog that I had just flown through, and it was all clear blue sky. And that's the thing I couldn't understand at that time, but I understand
that
it
would
now.
have freaked me out.
Yeah. And at that point, the radar controller comes back on the mic, and he's really excited. And he's yelling. He's got an airplane directly over Miami Beach. And I told him, well, first I looked at my watch, and I saw that I'd only been flying for 33 minutes. So I should be maybe 80 miles or so east of Miami. And I told him that. I said, no, it can't be us. You got another airplane. And then it happened so fast, see, my eyes went from the dull gray to the bright blue, and so they had to adjust. And so I actually couldn't see the land below me when he first started yelling, and then they focused, and then I could see that. Oh, there it was, Miami Beach, directly below me. So I told him he's right. I'm over Miami, and so I signed off with him, and he didn't want to let me go. I told him, no, it's all right, we'll be all right. And but then I did encounter another big thunderstorm between Miami and Palm Beach, so I had to fly way out to the west, about 35 miles.
Yeah, if I were you, I would have avoided it at all costs after the last one.
And I had to go from 10,000 feet down to just 500 feet to get underneath this storm, because there was another storm connected to it out over the Everglades, and I was able to get down low and go in between the two of them over the Everglades, and then go to Palm Beach International. And then when we landed, we got out of the airplane at customs. I look at my watch, and I said, "What? This can't be right. This flight only took 48 minutes, and normally it takes like an hour and a half." So something didn't make sense here. But I realized that I had just experienced a phenomenon that someday would be important for the entire world to know about.
Oh, absolutely.
So I committed it to memory right from that point on. And I've been doing so ever since. And it wasn't until just over a year later that I learned that there's something that was called, back then it wasn't even called the Bermuda Triangle. I think they were calling it the Limbo of the Lost in 1971.
I remember in the early 80s, I had a subscription. I don't know, some book that they had out there. It was pretty much on a lot of paranormal stuff, and I'll never forget the one book that I got on the Bermuda Triangle, and I've always found it very interesting. So very in deep in the story. I mean, it's quite interesting, and I mean, time travel would just be a phenomenal discovery. Now, do these storms just appear out of nowhere, or do you feel that there's a certain time, or I mean, how does this work? Or did you and the professor figure any of that out?
Well, the professor is trying to relate it to the solar wind, and he thinks he's got the cases, like close to 90% of the disappearances the solar wind was very high. See, it varies by day to day. It's more of a month-to-month thing, though. I mean, we can go for months where it's low, but then we'll go for months when it's high. Well, he could explain it better than me. It could be week to week, too. So he collects all this data and then analyzes it. And he's discovered that close to 90% of the disappearances have happened when the solar wind is high and there's thunderstorms in the area that have high tops. If they can reach over 50,000 feet, that's when he believes what I created the name of electronic fog. He believes that this electronic fog can form when that situation occurs, when the solar winds are high and there's thunderstorms in the areas that reach over 50,000 feet. When you get that combination, that's when this can happen.
Okay. Now, is this something like, would you compare it to like sliders? I mean, where you just kind of, there you are, and you go through this time warp, I mean, and you end up somewhere else? Or where do you think you were in that time? Just stop dead in time, do you think? Or
yeah, no, well, yeah, it's kind of like the sliders. And Professor Paris, he actually thinks I was traveling even much faster than I even realized. And at first, when he told me this theory, I couldn't accept it. But then I started thinking about it, analyzing it, and he could definitely be right. See, when I went through this tunnel, that's when time started shifting. That's when this space warp, he'd rather call it a space warp, because time actually didn't change. The time on my watch always remained the same as the time on Earth. So that's when this space warp started happening, when I entered this tunnel. But after I escaped through this tunnel, that's when this amazing shift in space and time took place. And he thinks that sensation that I was telling you about, the zero gravity, when I explained that to him in detail, that's when he got all excited, and he kind of realized that something was actually taking place at that point in space and time at an incredible rate. And I was actually feeling it. And during that 10 seconds, I was transported from, I was like 90 miles west of Miami, and I ended up 10 miles offshore of Miami. So that's 80 miles in only a few seconds later. And see, when I called Miami, telling them I'm like 80 miles away, I was actually back to normal now. I was 10 miles offshore of Miami, and it took me 3 minutes to reach Miami, which is how long it should take me if everything's normal. And that's how long it took. So he thinks I actually traveled this 80 miles in only a matter of seconds.
And the amazing thing is that the plane actually stuck together, and that tells me that it was pretty stable inside this tunnel.
Yeah, it remained stable. But he says that what I was feeling would actually be the sensation I would feel theoretically while this space warp was happening. He compares it to like the warp drive in Star Wars.
Uh-huh.
Something similar to that. And so
That's
he's
fast.
trying real hard to prove that it's true. And he's a noted mainstream research scientist. And so he's trying to convince all his colleagues to further investigate this case. Because he says that if what I experienced actually happened, that it would be one of the greatest discoveries in the history of humans.
I would have to agree.
Yeah. So that's what drives me to keep researching this for so long, just to help, contribute to discovering that this is actually right there. It's like it's kind of like electricity or lightning. Hundreds of years ago, lightning was considered to be supernatural, and maybe something to do with the gods, or they didn't know what it was. But then Benjamin Franklin had an experience with it, maybe similar to what I did. He actually manipulated the lightning, and so it's kind of like what I did. I had a manipulation when I went through this tunnel. So it's a matter
and not to get off subject, but there's a lot of times during storms and stuff, I hear so many accounts of UFOs, and I often wondered sometimes if they don't use the electricity like that, the lightning, should we say, to move at the speeds that they do.
Yeah, they can do incredible maneuvers. I have seen a lot of UFOs, always at night for some reason. Mm-hmm. And some of them do seem to be associated with the area of the Bermuda Triangle. But
I was going to ask you if you thought there was any connection there.
Yeah, one night I saw like 5 of them all heading from the north offshore. They're well offshore, heading sort of toward Bimini. And then I watched one of them make a turn. It was a 90-degree turn, and it didn't have any curve to it. It was a square turn. So that was a pretty incredible thing to see at high speed. So that may have something to do with time and space, if they can make a maneuver like that.
I always thought it did. I mean, like we were just talking a few minutes ago about sliders. I think they're on to something. I think that's one way to get somewhere very quickly. And I think it's possible. And it's possible because you did it. So now, what are you and the Professor Paris hoping to prove from all this? I mean, are you guys going to try to create this in some way where you can, try to study it better, or would you not want to go through that again?
Well, no, I wouldn't want to fly an airplane myself through it again. Our hopes are to have one of these new modern drones, remote-controlled airplanes with lots of scientific instruments on board.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's our goal. And that's not going to be easy to do because these tunnels are rare. I mean, I've probably seen 20 of them or so. But, of the 20 I've seen, maybe only a few of them were really intense,
mm-hmm.
where the others were maybe only a mile long or so. And so
now I've heard of ships as well getting caught up in these things. Now, do you suppose they're affected the same way?
Well, the ships have definitely been in the electronic fog, and I've actually talked to quite a few people that have experienced it, and I've talked to pilots too that have been in it, and most of them they thank me for my research, because it happened to them. A lot of them, it happened to them a long time ago, and it's been bugging them for many, many years, because they can't understand, why it was so strange. And of course, the main thing that I discovered after researching this for so long was that this electronic fog attaches itself to you. See, when I came out of the tunnel, that's when this electronic fog attached to the aircraft. So I never.
Yeah, because it was catching right up to you.
Yeah. See, so I couldn't figure out, well, how did I get from 90 miles from Miami to just offshore of Miami in such a short time? But the other thing was, how come I never could see the clear blue sky? I always thought, and the same as all other pilots and mariners have thought, is that they were traveling through this fog. And so my theory is that you're not traveling through it, you're traveling with it. You see, and that hasn't been verified by mainstream science yet. But I'm sure it will be in the future, because that's had to be what happened to me. And it's similar to St. Elmo's fire. And we know that's out there. I mean, we're not too sure about how that works, but we realize that St. Elmo's fire attaches to the vessel and goes with you. You're not going through it. You're going with it. And that's the same thing that this electronic fog does. And because it's so strange, and it can be very intense, that it induces spatial disorientation. If you're a pilot, you get spatial disorientation, and that makes you go into a graveyard spiral. And there's been a lot of planes, dozens of planes, that have done that. And most of them go through a series of turns, and normally to the right, because they're all probably right-handed. And that only compounds the problem. See, when I was in this electronic fog, I never made one turn. I maintained that 290-degree heading in my mind the whole time that I was in it. And I didn't even look at my instruments anymore, because I knew they were all going haywire. So what happens to these other pilots is they're looking at their instruments and trying to figure out how to get out of this, and they'd make a turn, and then another turn, and now they really have no idea. Make a third turn, and now you're really lost. They just got no idea of where they're heading after you go through a series of turns, because you can't look at your compass. Everything's not working right, so you have to guess which way you're heading.
And that's where they disappear then, because they just don't know where they are. And I just want to say that I myself have never been in a plane yet, but if I ever take that ride, I would love for you to be my pilot, because you sound like one hell of a pilot.
Well, thanks. Well, another thing I think I've discovered is that it does attach to you, and you're over a body of water like I was, then you should head toward the mainland. And because what happens is when you reach that mainland, it will detach from you. And then just the opposite can happen, because it happened to me in 1996. I was over the mainland of the Everglades, and the electronic fog attached to me. And this was a less intense fog, but every bit as strange. And it appeared to only be on the bottom of the airplane. And it was an illusion. It looked like there was fog for miles and miles and miles. And I actually called the weather station in Miami, and I asked them how extensive was this fog that I was seeing, because it looked like it covered all of South Florida. And he said to me, what fog are you talking about? I said, the fog that I'm looking at. My wife was with me. The fog we're looking at here, it's everywhere. He says, I don't know what fog you're seeing, but there's no fog reported in anywhere Florida. And so I realized that was strange at that point.
No, absolutely.
And then I noticed, though, there was a opening in this fog directly below the airplane. And there's another famous, the most documented probably of all flights in electronic fog by a well-known author named Martin Caden. And he was flying from Bermuda to Jacksonville, and he encountered it in a big flying boat. It was the Catalina flying boat, and there was all kinds of military dignitaries on board the plane. And they experienced this fog for 3 hours. And it had a hole below them and above them. It was like a circular opening in the fog. And when I encountered it the second time, it had the opening directly below the airplane. And I'm looking through the hole, and I can see the Everglades below the airplane, and the Everglades is moving at the same speed as me, about 180 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, wow, that's really, really strange. This must be some kind of phenomenon here. And I was scared, though, at this point, because my wife was freaking out, too. Wasn't sure what to do, but so then I got the idea, well, I'm going to head for the ocean, because I couldn't get away from this fog. So I made a turn to the east, and the closer I got to the ocean, the more the hole started getting bigger. And then it got bigger and bigger, and then I felt more relieved after a while, because then I spotted an airport, and I said, okay. And then when I got over the ocean, the hole was so big that the only thing that remained was this ring, a strange ring around the airplane. And again, it's like an illusion. I'm thinking that this ring was maybe 2-3 miles away from the airplane. But no, it's more like maybe 20 yards or so, 20, 30 yards away from the airplane. And when you look through the ring, there was a strange gap in whatever you were seeing. It's kind of like looking through a camera lens. When you adjust the lens, there's a gap until you get it focused.
Yes.
There's a gap in what you're looking at. Well, that's what this looked like when you looked through this ring around the airplane. There was a gap in the clouds or the land or whatever you're looking through. And I thought that was really strange. And it stayed with me all the way from, this was from the Florida Keys where I took off. And I encountered it in the Everglades, and then got offshore of Key Largo, and it stayed with me for the next 30 minutes that the flight took the whole way back to my airport in Palm Beach County. And I can remember even when I was on final approach and just only 100 feet above the runway, I could still see the ring around the airplane. But,
wow, it sounds to me like it's a little more than just a fog. I mean, it's like there's something to this, you know?
Well, that's why I call it electronic fog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can affect time. That's what makes it completely different than other types of fog. But apparently, it spawned inside these vortex tunnels. And the tunnels are usually around 10,000 feet up. And when the tunnel collapses, it emits like a puff of this electronic fog. And like other fogs, it can last for hours. And it apparently just drifts around. And it can even go down to the ground. Because I think people even in cars, automobiles, have had experiences with this. I get emails from all over the world. I just had a guy from Puerto Rico tell me about he was driving a car and went into this fog, and something like 30 seconds later he came out and he was 15 miles ahead of where he should have been. And then
I'll remember that next time I drive through fog, because we get it a lot here in South Carolina.
It can happen. It can actually happen on the ground. And this was an area in Puerto Rico where he claims this is a road where it's a very remote area. And he claims that there's been other cars that have been on this road and they've disappeared. So he was just communicating with me and let me know that he thinks the electronic fog can also happen right on the ground.
That's interesting.
That it's powerful enough for disintegration.
I wonder if it actually disintegrates them or if they end up somewhere else. Maybe another dimension. And I know I'm getting out there a little bit, but...
Yeah. I don't know. Well, that's a good question. That's beyond me.
Because they just disappear and they don't find anything from them. I mean, I would imagine if a car was on the road and that happened, you would expect to find something somewhere. And if you don't, then you'd have to believe that they've traveled somewhere, maybe in time.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, Bruce, I want to take a break here for just a minute here, and when we come back, I know that you had something else that you wanted to talk about so we can get to that as well when we get back. Okay, so everybody, we'll be back in a moment. I am Michael Barra.
Yeah. I've been on a lot of television shows. The last one I was on was one of the best ones for me anyway. Discovery Channel just came out with one where they've got a lot of animation and they show how this electronic fog attaches to the airplane, and they devoted about half of the show to my theories. I was really happy with that one. But I'm working now on a couple more TV shows. One was from an English producer, and the other one, though, is interesting. It's that celebrity named Jesse Venturi.
Yes.
He was a famous wrestler.
Uh-huh.
He still plays around with wrestling a little bit, and the governor, I think, of Minnesota.
Yes, I'm actually working on getting him on this show.
Oh, he'd be great.
Yeah, I've been talking with the publicist here and there. I'm doing my best.
All right, well, good luck.
He's a busy man.
Yeah, well, his producer contacted me, and one of their shows is going to be about Andros Island and Navy base there called AUTEC. And they want to get me involved in that because, well, why I'm not sure really, but mainly because there's so many strange things going on around Andros Island, and this government-sponsored Navy base, along with I believe it's RCA, that they work together, and they've been there since the early '60s. And in 1970, that was the day that I took off from visiting my friend there in Andros, where he worked at this Navy base. And so then I had this encounter, which is, you know, known all around the world, and that's it's strange, of course, and so it's another strange happening that happened, that they're associating it with this Navy base. I was wondering if you had any ideas about whether what I experienced could possibly have anything to do with this government cover-up that's going on at AUTEC, because I know there's definitely government cover-up going there. I've had friends that work there, and I was there just last year and talking to people, and everything is top secret. It's like anybody that works there, they can't tell you anything about their job. But let me tell you one thing that happened to me just recently.
Okay.
I was at a local bar here, and I met a guy about my age, and I told him who I was, and he said he knew all about me. And he said he was an engineer that worked for AUTEC at the Navy base. And I said, wow, that's really interesting. And so he kind of like had maybe a few too many drinks, and he's feeling pretty good. So I asked him, well, has anything ever happened on the island that's strange that you could tell me about? And he said, yeah, 2 things have happened. And he said, but I can't tell you about one of them, but I'll let you know about the other one. And he said, we were in the submarine, and we were doing some tests in the tongue of the ocean, in like 5,000 feet of water, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then something strange happened, and within a few seconds, the submarine ended up 50 miles away from where it previously was. Somehow it had traveled like 50 miles in only a matter of seconds.
Wow. You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because, you know, the government certainly has quite a bit of cover-up on stuff of that nature. And as a matter of fact, tomorrow night, I have a gentleman coming on who says that they have the ability to teleport from here to Mars or the moon or whatever they wish, and that they have secret programs like that. And I somewhat believe it because, you know, they're doing away with the space shuttle. Is that because they don't need it? You know? So, you know, it's interesting that you say that. And I wouldn't actually put it past them to be behind that kind of thing.
Right. So you're saying they're probably like still in the experimental stages of teleportation, and I may have just got in their way somehow during one of their experiments.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe they just targeted you and said, hey, there's a plane, let's try this,
boy.
You know.
That's the first time I heard that, but I heard the other one once from one of my professors many years ago when he first learned about what was going on. It's the first thing he said. He said, you may have got involved with AUTEC in one of their experiments.
You know, I haven't heard a lot about that, but now that you've brought it up, I'm definitely going to look into it.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, thanks. That's what I'll tell Jesse Venturi, that maybe that's what happened. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I know that he had a show, Conspiracy Theory. Now are they going to continue running that?
Yeah,
okay, great.
Yeah,
great.
that's what we're working on right now. We just started working on that. Yeah, it's going to be a series.
Yeah, he's great. He's very good at getting to the bottom of things. I love watching that show. So that'll be quite interesting to see him get involved.
Yeah, that would be. Now, I don't know if you heard the latest things about Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist.
Yes, I sure have.
Recently announced something about alien encounters.
Mm-hmm. And he said that it would be dangerous to make contact with them. And I mean, it kind of throws me off a little, because that would be to say that we haven't already made contact, and I believe that we have.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't think we have too much choice about avoiding them. But I mean, I can see what he's saying, though. If we can avoid them, by all means, that would be the wise thing to do.
Well, I would think that it's going to be hard for the simple reason, I mean, with all the signals we have coming off this planet, and then you think back in World War II, the atomic bombs, I think that probably alerted them that we were here when that happened. You know?
Probably, yes, it would have.
Yeah.
But did you hear what he just said recently, though, about time travel?
No, actually I didn't.
Yeah, he's announced that he believes that time travel is possible.
Well, it's good to hear him say that, because I believe so, too.
That's the first time he said that. And see, I communicated with him maybe 10 years ago when I was working on my book. And, yeah, by the way, if anybody's listening, it's called The Fog. It's still in publication. The Fog, a never-before-published theory of the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon. And I sent him my manuscript before it was printed, and he looked it over, and he was interested in it. But he gave me some advice. He said, don't tell people that you traveled through time, because they think you're a quack.
Now, have you heard of Andy Basiago?
No.
No. Well, he's actually one of the whistleblowers on this Pegasus project, and he's the guy who I have coming on tomorrow night, and he claims that time travel is possible, and that he's been a part of that secret project when he was a child, and that they actually go back in time or go forward, or however you want to say it, and they evaluate the presidents before they're even elected. So it's quite interesting. So your story has a lot of push, because you're not the only one that believes this. Time travel, I really do believe, is possible, and I believe that's most likely what you went through. I mean, that's the only explanation, really.
Well, mine is really the most documented of all the cases, and I also have proof that I used 10 gallons less fuel when I made this trip. I have the actual gas receipt from December 4th, 1970, and it's 10 gallons less than it should have been for making the flight. See, and that would coincide with the 30 minutes in time that I saved. The plane would burn close to 10 gallons in those 30 minutes.
Well, that says a lot right there. You know, that should be an eye-opener for anybody who's interested in studying time travel, because obvious. I mean, if you didn't use the fuel it would have took to go that distance, especially that fast. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, Bruce.
Yeah, I've still got the original document.
It's truly amazing. Everybody, again, is going to be on with us for probably about another 10, 15 minutes. So if you want to call in and ask a question, it is 347-989-1012. But yeah, Bruce, we're going to be talking about time travel again tomorrow night, and I got to say that I find it fascinating, and I would love for scientists to figure this out, because I'd sure like to go back in time a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So now, since you've been out there, now when you go on these flights weekly, you've seen in that time since that time travel experience, you've seen similar tunnels, I suppose, right? But nothing like that day. You've never experienced that a second time?
Right. The tunnels that I've seen, usually they've formed over the Everglades. There's a lot of thunderstorms that form over the Everglades. And when there's two cumulonimbus storms side by side, and they both form anvil heads, the anvil heads will connect on the top and then form this horizontal tunnel in between them. So I've seen a lot of those form over the Everglades. And we're hoping to be able to fly a drone through one of these someday, because there probably would be some effects that could affect time if we could fly through this. But the storm that I flew through was somewhat different than just two thunderstorms side by side. It was this big ring-shaped storm. And if you look on my website, on the slideshow, it'll show a photo of a circular-shaped ring that formed actually up in Indiana. And the guy that captured this, his name was Don Peltz, and he was the former sheriff of one of the counties there, the head sheriff. And he had an experience while driving his car, and he saw this storm, and it was like a wall of clouds. Sounds similar to what I saw. And what happened was there was a tunnel in the storm, and this spear shape, I guess you could call it a UFO or a ball lightning, went right in front of his car while he was driving, and then went through this horizontal tunnel in the clouds. And then he started feeling nauseous. His dad was with him too when this happened. I guess they both got nauseous. So they pulled over the side of the road and stopped, and then they had some sort of a time experience that it's not like they went forward in time. It's like time stopped. And it's something like he was there for a couple of hours or something, and but then the time didn't go forward. It just stayed still. So he had some sort of a time experience, and so he contacted me. This was like 10 years ago, and told me about this experience, and he thought it was related to what I experienced. And I said, yeah, it sounds like it could be. So I said, look, with all your credentials as the ex-head sheriff there, why don't you go to the weather departments and see if you can get the radar images of what was going on the day that you had this experience. So he did that. It took him over 2 years, but he came up with the radar images. And so the image that's on my website is just one still shot, but I have the actual moving radar. It's a 3-hour loop. And what it does is it shows these storms that all pop up at the same time. And there's more than one, though. There's actually like 5 of these storms. And they're all about 40 miles in diameter, similar to the storm that I encountered over the Great Bahama Bank. And they're all donut-shaped. And they all form instantly. And they last about 20 minutes. And then they're gone. And so that's the exact same storm that I experienced. And this was in Indiana. So
I've heard many claims from people that even that the government is capable of controlling, making storms, controlling weather for just a short period of time, like say a 20 or 30-minute period of time. So, it gets more interesting as we go along here because they could very well be behind it.
Yeah. That's funny. When you look at this video, you've never seen it, but when you watch this and what you just told me, it almost looks like it's an experiment. When you see these 5 rings popping up out of the earth and then just disappearing in 20 minutes, it's like that's really not even close to being normal.
No, absolutely not. And when this show is over this evening, I will get over to that website and check that out because, no, I didn't have a chance to look at it, but I definitely want to. Yeah,
great. There's a still shot there.
Okay.
And, maybe someday I'll show you the live shot. But he was working on a book. He was really into this, and he was on TV with me once too. And he was making progress on it, and he was really into the UFOs too because he saw that sphere-shaped ball lightning enter the thing, and so he was checking that out too. But unfortunately, he died just a year ago.
That is unfortunate.
Yeah.
I've seen UFOs on a few occasions myself in my life, and again, UFO meaning unidentified flying object. I don't know if anybody was driving it, but all I can say is I think it would appear in one spot, and then boom, just like the blink of an eye, it's miles across the sky in another spot. So it's amazing what they can do, and I know some people are skeptical about UFOs and such, but they exist. They really do exist.
Yes, they definitely exist, and I also believe they've probably been around for thousands of years.
Well, sure, because if you look at some of these caves where they find these drawings and so on from thousands of years ago, I don't think they were making up UFO stories back then, and they have, these crafts drawn on these cave walls and extraterrestrials, figures drawn on the walls, and to them they were probably gods, is how they've seen them. I mean, it'd be like us going back, say, 1,000 years and landing a helicopter somewhere.
They treated them like gods. And even one of the pharaohs, Tutankhamun's father, his head was just about twice the size as normal. It stuck out way in the back. There's 2 new shows on television, documentaries, each 2 hours long about ancient astronauts that I've been watching. They showed the actual film of Tutankhamun's dad when they discovered him in 1910. And I was kind of shocked when I saw the shape of his skull.
Yeah, and I understand that there's, they have different races of them, and that there's actually one particular alien race that I'm told looks just like us. Like they've walked among us, and we'd never even know.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. And there's the Greys. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they created us in their image.
I believe that too. I really do. That's kind of a theory I have. There is a God. I think God created life, but I think that life created us. Just as we can create, we can clone human beings now. Who's to say that somebody else didn't experiment and put us here? And it's just a theory. I'm not saying it's true. But yeah, Bruce, if you don't mind, let's go to the phone lines for a moment here, and we're going to take the call. Okay? All right. Well, in a second I will. I guess my screener's working on it. But, yeah, maybe take one call, and then we'll close it out. I would like to get you back in the future and maybe even get the professor back with you. I think that would be quite interesting
yes,
to hear what he has to say as well.
He's brilliant. He's very impressive when you talk to him. He's a longtime meteorologist, but he's also a physicist and a geologist. So the combination of those three things has given him more knowledge about the Bermuda Triangle, I think, than anybody in the world.
Yes, I was listening to the interview that the two of you did on Coast to Coast, and I had actually just listened to it a couple of nights ago. And if I had known earlier and had the time, I would have definitely tried to work on getting both of you on, and maybe even going longer with the show, because that was one interesting interview that I listened to.
Well, we're going to be continuously working on this, so we'll give you a progress report.
I would appreciate that. You guys get to the point where you're sending that drawing through one of these time tunnels. I would definitely love to hear the results on that. I think the whole world would.
Yeah, you should check out his website, too. He's got more detail about my theories than anyone else has ever had before.
Okay, if you want to give out your website and the professor's website, please, by all means, go ahead, so just in case anybody's just tuning in.
Okay, mine's Bermuda Triangle Fog.com. And you can find his website by going on my website and just go to the contact pages, and you'll see a link there, because his website, it's kind of hard to say over there. It's paris-wx-research.info/ that's PARES. And our partner was a business associate, so there was three of us on board, and we departed the island and took off at exactly 3 p.m. We lifted off. I had a good friend there named John Woolbright that was a mathematical scientist that worked for Autech. And I'd like to talk to you about Autech sometime while we're interviewing, if we could. Because
absolutely.
I noticed conspiracies are one of your expertise. And
yes, sir.
So if we could talk about that sometime when we get a chance, I'd like to talk to you about that.
I would like that myself, sir.
So yeah, so it was from Autech was where I was visiting there in Andros Island, where my friend worked, and I wanted to leave in the morning, but there was a large thunderstorm over the island. And back in 1970, radar weather was not nearly the way it is today, where you can get it on the GPS and see exactly what the situation is. And in 1970 in Andros Island, they didn't even have a telephone on the entire island, so I couldn't get any weather. So we had to just look and see what it looked like, and it looked too intense to be taken off in the morning. And then it finally cleared up in the afternoon. But my partner, Professor Paris, has reviewed the weather. He's a meteorologist for many years, and he's actually come up with the weather, what it looked like on that day. And there was a large, and it was about 1,000 feet thick, and maybe a mile long and a half-mile wide. And it was shaped like a lens, and it had smooth, silky edges.
Wow.
And I just started to climb up and accelerate at the same time that I noticed this cloud. And it was right in my flight path, directly in front of me. And it looked harmless. So I went ahead and climbed up over it, and it was 2 or 3 miles offshore of Andros. And then when I got on top of it, I was about 3,000 feet high. I was able to contact Miami Radio for the first time and file my flight plan. And I asked them about the weather, and they said that the weather was clear between Andros and Florida, but there was some widely scattered large thunderstorms around South Florida that I should probably be able to circumnavigate when I got there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I filed the flight plan with them and continued climbing up. And then after I got through filing that flight plan, I got back to concentrating on what the weather looked like outside, and I was really surprised at what I saw here. This lenticular cloud had completely changed its formation, and it had spread out on either side of me, or all around me, as far as I could see, and the visibility was at least 10 miles. And
now, anything is possible in weather, but now that's not normal at all, right?
No, it's not. A website also that's dedicated to my theories and the Bermuda Triangle.
Okay. All right. So now, after looking into your story just a little bit, I'd have to say that's got to be quite scary, Bruce, to be flying through fog and radar control says they can't find you on their radar. So I don't know where exactly you'd like to start, but I guess we can start with that if you like.
Yeah, it's scary. I've been in it twice. The second time I was in it back in 1996 in the Florida Keys. I was more scared than the first time, and yet that second time was only a mild form of this electronic fog. But the reason I was more afraid was because I was getting older. And when I experienced this back in 1970, I was only 23 years old. And I was kind of like the kids nowadays that have no fear. I had that attitude, and it actually it didn't scare me back then. And I concentrated mostly on flying the airplane anyway, which is always the number one thing you have to do when you're a pilot. So all my concentration was there, and I didn't really have time to get scared. But it happened way back in December 4th, 1970. And I was leaving Andros Island in the Bahamas with my dad. He was the co-pilot. System of low pressure over Andros Island and Nassau, and heavy rains all that morning, and then it cleared up in the afternoon. So that's when we took off, and it was just a light mist when we took off, and the ceiling was about 1,500 feet, so we stayed at 1,000 feet over the island and started heading direct for Bimini.
Mm-hmm.
And it remained overcast until we got to the western edge of Andros Island. And at that point, it cleared up. So the pressure system was mainly over the island of Andros, and that's the largest island in the Bahamas, 40 miles wide by 110 miles long. And that probably helped to create this weather system. And then when we got clear of the island, the weather was clear. And when I looked offshore over the Great Bahama Bank, I noticed this strange cloud, which was the beginning, the birth stage of this storm system that I experienced. And I call this system a time storm.
Interesting.
And it was an elliptical shaped cloud. And it looked like what's known as a lenticular cloud. But lenticular clouds only form at about 20,000 feet. And this cloud was only about 500 feet above the ocean.
Let me introduce our guest for tonight. My guest tonight is Bruce Gernon. Bruce Gernon is the only person in the world to witness what creates the Bermuda Triangle. Others have seen parts of this phenomena, and some have seen it but vanished. Gernon is the only one to see this from its birth stage through its mature stage and enter the heart of the time storm and escape through a tunnel vortex and experience a time warp of 30 minutes forward in time and 100 miles forward in space. After 31 years of research, Gernon discovered how he had flown those 100 miles in such a short time and never seen the earth or sky around him. He was captured by what he calls electronic fog. Everybody, please welcome, once again, my guest, Bruce Gernon. Good evening, sir. So good to have you here.
Hey, Michael. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, by all means, thank you. So, Bruce, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with the Bermuda Triangle, and tell everybody a little bit about yourself as well. And if you have a website, which I know you do, you could throw that out there too.
Okay, sure, yeah. My website is BermudaTriangleFog.com.
Okay.
And on that website, there's also my new partner's website, Professor David Paris. You can find him on the contact page, and he has a website.